Staying quiet is not acceptable. We must speak, we must stand up, we must support one another. We're all human. We deserve the same rights, human rights.
And that sound from the rally in Washington, but frankly, it could be at any rally that we're seeing literally in cities across this country, and not just the scene earlier today. And if you look in cities like Manhattan, you can multiply the amount of folks that have turned out. All right, let me go around the table and let's close the show out on a personal note. All of you have sons, and we've talked before on or off camera, Mayo, about the talk. You got a freshman in high school. I assume you've had the talk, and has it changed at all given what we've seen in the news cycle for the last few months?
Well, for me it hasn't, because I was in law enforcement for 11 years. But I've told my son, and I've told the kids I coach basketball, soccer, go to schools and churches and talk to kids all the time about how to survive your encounter with law enforcement. And it's not the suggestion that law enforcement's there to hurt you, but there's certain things you have to do if you want to make sure you come away. And one of them is that you got to be polite at all costs, even if the officer is not polite to you. How not to move too quickly because you may have an officer who's afraid of you. Even if it's not a rational fear, the goal is to get home. And even if the officer's 100% wrong, you know, yes officer, no officer. I mean, I found myself having to use these techniques basically, and sometimes even with black law enforcement officers over traffic stops where they thought I was driving too fast. But you have to have that conversation. I think it's irresponsible not to have it, and then to let them know what to do if things go wrong. If the police officer wants to arrest you, to call me, you know, and tell them that you want to talk to your lawyer. It's important to know your rights, and the more I thought about it, and we've had this conversation a lot, I don't think we're really taught our rights. We're not taught, the Fourth Amendment. We're not taught the Fifth and Sixth Amendments. We kind of go over that maybe one day in school and you're never to be returned. And if we don't know those most important rules about our country, we're all potentially at risk.
You know, Kenneth, obviously you are part of this conversation because of the worst day, I imagine, of your life in losing your dad. But are you more optimistic now, albeit through other tragedies in Staten Island, in Cleveland, in Missouri, and wherever else, because of the public conversation, or are you just as frustrated as you were before?
Well, I'll always be frustrated, and that's only because when I look at my father's case, there's been no accountability. They continue to deny any wrongdoing, and we know that the evidence clearly shows that there should have been an indictment when there wasn't. Now, as far as my children are concerned, my sons, when I speak to them about the killing of their grandfather, my oldest son simply said to me, he said, "Dad, I'm afraid of the police." And then you say, well, how do you respond to that? Or my youngest daughter asking me, well, why did they kill my grandfather? I have no answers for them other than to say that if you are stopped by law enforcement, to just comply. I explained to my youngest daughter that you do have good law enforcement officers out there, and I introduced her to friends of mine who are law enforcement officers who she had no idea were. And I say, yes, that's a detective, that's a patrolman, you know, so she feels a little at ease, but I also know that she's very, very nervous around them. But I always say that we can't expect to hold law enforcement accountable if we don't hold ourselves accountable. And one of the ways that we do that is educating our children on what to do if they encounter law enforcement, if they're stopped, if they're questioned, whatever the case may be.
Pastor, I'm sure you've had some interesting sermons the last month on Sundays and a lot of questions. You think, from your experience, we're at a tipping point in a lot of ways, that people aren't hoping they're going to demand change or different answers?
I think that fear takes all kinds of forms, and we're seeing it in the protests, and we're hearing it in the language right now. For my sons, I have two sons and a daughter, I asked my youngest, who is still at home, he's a freshman in college, how he felt about what he just saw, and he said he's angry. And so trying to get him to unpack that anger was a challenge, because you're talking to a former Boy Scout and police explorer whose father wears a uniform. And so I just, I expressed to him that when I put that uniform on and I step outside that door, I am no different than any other member of the Greenwich Police Department. And so what it looks like outside of these moments is so different than what it looks like in the heat of the moment. And so is this a tipping point? Perhaps. Is it a time for us to rethink strategies on how we can be in relationship with each other? Absolutely. And do I have the talk with my sons that my father had with me? Without question. Without question.
And Chief, not to put you on the spot, but you come from a family of law enforcement. You rose to the highest ranks of the NYPD. Would you want your kids to also follow you into uniform?
That would be a decision that they would have to make. I certainly, I've never encouraged them. I've never spoken to them about doing it. That would be an independent decision, and I would support them no matter what decision that they made. I think law enforcement is a noble profession. I think it's the noblest when it's done correctly. The sense of gratification and satisfying that you can have with helping people on a day-by-day basis, in my opinion, is unparalleled. So I love the industry. I love the profession. And when it's done correctly, I don't think you can beat it. So if they decide to go into law enforcement, once they make that decision, I would support them. But that's going to be a decision that they're going to have to make independently.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you all. Terrific conversation, and I'm sure a lot of people at home were either nodding along or have their own share of questions. And unfortunately, the one thing we don't have more of is time. So thank you at home for joining us. That's going to do it for this evening. Have a great night, and I'll see you on RFL weeknight at 6 p.m.